As Debbie said, I'm here for the next 2 weeks, and so I was trying to think of a lesson that could kind of like bridge the gap, but also if some people weren't here this week, that they wouldn't feel like they were missing out next week. So I've been kind of working on and thinking a lot about blessings and belovedness, and that's coming next week. But part of my understanding of that and curiosity around those things kind of stemmed out of a lesson that I taught. Well, actually, it's a combination of lessons that I taught for Lunch and Learn that were all centered around covenants. We went through the Old Testament and kind of went from Genesis to, at least chronologically speaking, through 2 Kings. And so I got an opportunity to teach on a lot of the different covenants that show up in the Hebrew Bible, and kind of compiled them into a general lesson about covenants, because I think there's something that they speak to when we start to understand our relationship with God and God's relationship with God's creation over time and over the span of humanity. And so I wanted to kind of talk about that today. We're going to be looking at the major covenants in the Hebrew Bible and kind of looking at what's the same and what's different, comparing and contrasting. And then I hope next week that we might take some of the stuff that we've gathered from today as we kind of shift and talk about blessing and belovedness and all of those kinds of things next week. Sound good? All right. Let's start with what major covenants? Anybody? Can we throw them out on the board?
Noahic.
Yes. Noah's covenant.
Abraham's.
Oh, hold on.
Whoa.
Noahic. How do you spell Noahic? It's a C, right? Yeah. Thank you, Brad. So Abrahamic, right? That we got that one over there. Okay. What else? 2 more. Mosaic, yes.
I thought that was a tile.
We're doing arts and crafts lesson at the end of all of it.
Let's go back to vacation Bible.
So glad you're here, Richard. Richard's my ping pong guy over here. We can volley back and forth our little sarcastic comments. I depend on him.
Where does circumcision come in there?
The great question, we're going to get there. Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah, absolutely. All right, one more. Davidic, yes. The Davidic covenant. Okay.
Go back.
Here's our patriarchic covenant lesson coming up for us. Okay. These are all going to be stories that these are the major stories, right? Like this is all stuff that we could probably recite, but we're going to look into the scriptures so we can remember some of the details that may have escaped our memory over time. So let's start with the very first, with Noah. All right, we're going to be, if you have your Bible with you or your phone, with your Bible app, both work for me. We're going to be in Genesis 9 to begin here. And we'll read a little bit. So they've been on the boat, the rain has come, and they've landed, and they've gotten off the ark, right? And then we have the covenant begins in around verse 8. So can someone read for me Genesis chapter 9, verses 8 through 17?
Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, "As for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as come out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I've established between me and all flesh that is on the earth.
Thank you, Sam. Real quick aside, did y'all hear the repetition in that story there? Another time, if you want me back, I've got a really cool lesson where I show you that this is actually two separate versions that have been woven together. And that's why when you read this story, it feels like they're repeating themselves over and over and over again, because you've got two different versions from two different sources that are kind of zippered out and put together and zipped back up again as, anyway, fun little aside there. But okay, so what do we have here? What is the promise made in this covenant? What do you see? What did we read there?
I'm not gonna do this again.
I'm not going to do this again. What am I not going to do, Mike?
Cover the earth with flood
No more floods. No, covered, yeah, no more worldwide.
and not cut off all flesh.
We're not going to do that again. Okay. We're not going to do that again. We're not going to destroy the earth with a flood and cut off all living things, right? Anything else that we're promised here? What else is promised in this covenant?
Dominion over fish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That there's going to be dominion over that. There's also going to be, with every living creature that is with you, the birds and the domestic animals and every animal of the earth. Yes, I established, verse 11, I established my covenant with you that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And then for all future generations, there's that. What else do y'all see? Anything else? I can do that again. And it's going to continue for generations, right?
I'm taken with the fact that it's not a promise to people, it's a promise to
Yes.
everything God created.
That's right. Exactly right. The who here, which is where we're going next, it's not just to Noah and his family. It's to, say that again.
The earth.
The earth. It's to all creation, right? All of creation. So it's not just a promise made to Noah and his descendants and his family. It's a promise made to all of creation, which is important because we've just finished talking about how that was created to begin with, right? This is in the first 11 chapters of Genesis, which are kind of the prehistory, right? And then we'll get Abraham or Abram that'll show up in chapter 12. But from Genesis 1 through all the way through 11, what we have here is prehistory. And so what we understand of this is that this was the Israelites' understanding of these large narratives that were kind of in the areas of their time. So how did the earth get created? Why do we have so many different languages? Where does evil come from? And what about this massive flood that's happened that all of the different communities had different stories about, right? And this was the Israelites' version of that story. And so this is a promise not just to Noah, but this is to all of the earth. And in a minute, we're going to jump to chapter 12, and all of a sudden, scope will get much smaller. But this one right now is very much to all of creation. The animals, humanity, all of it. Okay, let's look at, there's a sign as well. What's the sign for the covenants here? The rainbow. That one's easy. That's a gimme. Okay, so we have the rainbow here. What I think is interesting, how does God talk about the rainbow here? What's the rainbow's purpose? Remind him, or remind God, right? It actually says, so when I see the rainbow, I will remember my promise to you. we usually see it as a reminder to us of God's promise, but the scripture here says it's God's reminder for God's self and for us too. But I always thought that was interesting when I went back and reread that too. I was like, oh, God said, when I see this rainbow, I will remember, which I think is interesting there as well. Okay, most of our covenants also have a sacrifice, a sealing, some sort of ceremony that happens as well. This one actually happens before the covenant is given. It's in chapter 8, verses 20 through 22. It says, then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took every clean animal of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing odor, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of humankind, for the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth, nor will I ever again destroy every living creature as I have done. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So that's the sacrifice or the binding, the ceremonial. When we talk about the different traditions that comes from like the priestly tradition, where ceremony was really important to make sure we're passing down the ceremonial elements of the faith. And so this goes to show that this was even happening before there was Abram. There was these ceremonies, this altar that happened there. Okay, and then the last is, what type of covenant is this? And I haven't given you any options. But this one is unconditional, okay? Because there are no conditions on the covenant. There's nothing that humankind needs to do. This is out of God's own heart and God's own, hold on, I can't talk in, unconditional. This is just based out of God's own character that this covenant comes along. So there's nothing that has to be done to keep this covenant. It is forever, okay? All right, so there's the first covenant. Let's go to the second one now. Abraham. This happens in Genesis 15, so not far after. We're introduced to Abraham, like I said, Abram at the time, in verse 12. So already, 3 chapters later, we have the first covenant. And let me see, let's read through, I'm trying to see where would be the best parts. Let's just start with chapter 15. I think we can just do almost the whole thing here. Anybody want to read the first 11 verses? So Genesis chapter 15, 1 through 11.
After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, you have given me no offspring. So a slave born in my house is to be my heir. But the word of the Lord came to him, this man shall not be your heir. No one but your own issue shall be your heir. He brought him outside and said, look toward the heaven and count the stars. If you're able to count them, then he said to him, so shall your descendants be. And he believed the Lord, and the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness. Then he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. But he said, O Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess it? And he said, bring me an heifer 3 years old, a female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young dove, and a young pigeon. He brought him all these and cut them in two, laying each half over against the other. But he did not cut the birds in two. And when birds of prey came down on the carcasses, Abraham drove them away.
Great. So we're starting to see the ceremony happening here. It's kind of woven into the middle of the covenant, right? So Abram has this question, right? There's this idea, I don't have any children. What's going to happen here, right? And so God says, go and get these animals and let me talk to you about what's about to happen, all right? So Abraham is faithful. He goes and grabs the animals and they start this sacrifice that's about to happen. And then we pick up in verse 12. Will someone read 12 to the end of the chapter through 21?
Through 21.
12 through, just the end of 15.
As the sun was setting, a deep sleep came over Abram. And suddenly great terror and darkness descended on him. Then the Lord said to Abram, "Know this for certain, your offspring will be resident aliens for 400 years in a land that does not belong to them and will be enslaved and oppressed. However, I will judge the nation they serve, and afterward they will go out with many possessions. But you will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure." When the sun had set and it was dark, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch appeared and passed between the divided animals. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, "I give this land to your offspring, from the brook of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates River, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hethites, Perizzites, Rephaim, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgasites, and Jebusites."
Extra points for reading all those words for us, Al. I do appreciate it. Okay, so this one's a little different, right? What do you notice? What's different about this covenant, the way that this one is done versus what we just read before? Kind of comes to Abram when? What is Abram doing when this covenant comes for him? Sleeping.
He's having a vision.
He's having a
or
vision,
dream.
a dream, right?
And
So it's a little
how
bit
you-
different.
how
Noah's
you do
was, yeah, he was very much conscious. You know, they'd just gotten off the ark. The promise is being made. Here, Abram's, it's much more to Abram specifically. He's sleeping. It's a dream. It's a vision. Maybe kind of that half state of awareness there. This thing is happening just with God and Abram, at least in the way that it's told here. So let's try to go through some of our categories again. What we have type. What is the promise? We'll start there. What is the promise made to Abram?
He will have his own heir.
Yes. So he'll have an heir. What else? Do we read in there? What else is promised to Abram?
We'll have a bunch of land.
All that land that Al had to read for us. Yes, there's land there too. Specific land. But land is in there. Okay, and then what else? I think there's one more. There's this idea that, and some of this does get it bleeds into some other chapters, but there is this idea that Abram's family and descendants will be a blessing to others, right? There's this universal blessing kind of idea. That they will be a blessing to the people that are around them and all of that as they come.
Countless as the stars.
Countless as the stars. I'm a child of the 90s. I always think of The Lion King when look into the stars, Mufasa and little Simba. Yeah. Okay, yes, so countless, right? Countless. Okay. Who is this blessing, who is this covenant for? Who is it made? It's made with Abram specifically, but who could we say that the covenant is for?
Israel, the nation.
Not quite yet. Eventually, yes. We'll get down there a little bit further. Who is it made with right now, though? Because there is no Israel as we understand it at this moment. But it's kind of the tribe of Abraham, right? It's very narrow right here. Kind of this family tribe. Okay, of Abraham. Is kind of what we have right here. Okay? So we've gone from all of creation to Abraham and Abraham's descendants, right? So we've really narrowed the scope right here, right off the bat. The sacrifice and the sealing we read kind of happened in the midst of all of that. The sign comes, again, none of this is truly in order. They were not thinking of future Sunday school teachers and how they would like to talk about it. But the sign will come later in chapter 17, and it will be circumcision, right? That this will be the sign of this covenant. That is the sign of the covenant, right? Because it's going to be through the male lineage there. And then what type of covenant is this? Thinking of conditional, unconditional, what are we told here? If we could put terms on it.
There were conditions.
What are the conditions?
It instructs Abram exactly what he's supposed to do as far as the animals.
Yes, for the sealing, for the sacrifice part of it, yes. But in the conditions of the covenant itself and the maintaining of the covenant,
Right here, he doesn't have to do anything.
he doesn't have to do anything yet.
It's
right
done.
here. It's
Right.
done. It's a promise. Now Abraham will try. He thinks it's conditional on an heir, right?
Yeah, he sure did.
He thought it was conditional. Yeah, but it's unconditional. There's nothing that Abraham has to do to get this covenant, right? Again, he thinks there will be, and so he will try to produce an heir of his own with Hagar, right? But this is unconditional. God is going to make good on this. There's nothing that Abraham can do to make himself earn this or to mess it up. It just is what it is. Okay? Does that make sense? Cool. All right, next. Mosaic. It's arts and crafts time. Richard, you ready?
Yeah.
Exodus chapter 19. So we're skipping forward a little bit to the time of Moses. And Moses, the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt. Moses gets called, and he goes and he asks Pharaoh, let my people go. They escape. And now they're in the wilderness, and they're wandering, and they're getting frustrated and irritated. I took a 14-hour drive from Breckenridge with my kids yesterday. It felt similar. It felt similar. Okay, so Exodus 19. God is going to going to establish a covenant with Moses. Let me see where I want us to start. We can start from the beginning. Let's do that one again too. So let's go 1 through 6. Does anybody want to do 1 through 6 for us? Of chapter 19 in Exodus.
On the third new moon after the, wait, am I in the right place?
That's right. Yep.
On the third new moon after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. They set out from Rephidim
Sure.
and came into the wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in the wilderness. There Israel encamped before the mountain, while Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him out of the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the people of Israel, You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel.
Okay, so there we go. There's the covenant right there. A little bit different than what we read with Abraham. So they're wandering, they get to Sinai. Moses goes up by himself, potentially, and God gives this covenant directly to Moses on Mount Sinai, right there, okay? So what do we hear? What is the promise? What is the promise given in the Mosaic covenant? Any ideas?
The promise to be God's people.
Yeah, my treasured possession. I love that. You will be my treasured possession. You shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a what? A priestly kingdom. So there's this too, a treasured possession, a priestly kingdom. Okay. Anything else that you see in there? Okay. Treasured possession, a priestly kingdom. God's chosen people, right? Is what's coming here. Let me see. What's the sign of this one? It's coming. We haven't gotten there yet. But what comes immediately after, if you flip your page or if you look further on the page? What's the next big thing that's coming in chapter 20? The Ten Commandments, right? And so the sign for this one, again, this is human terms put on a very ancient covenant, but keeping Torah is going to be how it started to be understood, because what type of covenant do we have here?
Conditional.
This one's conditional. What are the conditions? Yeah,
Obey my voice.
you've got to obey.
Keep my covenant.
Yeah, obey my voice, keep my covenants. And what's coming next are the 10 Commandments and the book of the covenant. We forget about that one, but that one's actually much longer and comes immediately following the 10 Commandments.
Can I just,
Yes, Al, yeah.
it's listen and obey.
Listen and obey.
It's not just obey.
That's exactly right. If you obey my voice and keep my covenant. Yeah, obey my voice, listen and obey. That's right. So this one is conditional. Hear my voice and obey me. And if you will do that, you will be a treasured possession, a priestly kingdom, a holy nation, right? These are the things that will come if you will listen and obey to my voice. Okay? The sacrifice and the sealing will come later in Exodus 24. That will be the ceremony that will happen to seal all of this, that Moses came and told the people the words of the Lord. He wrote down the words of the Lord. He rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up 12 pillars corresponding to the 12 tribes of Israel. And they'll do this whole sealing sacrifice thing there in chapter 24. And then the who. Who's the who of this now? Who? We went from Abram's family. They're starting to become, like the 12 tribes of Israel. It's kind of this holy nation idea. So we're going from a tribe to more of a nation, right? Okay, it's getting larger, it's starting to encompass more people. Brad?
It is interesting that in the second giving of the law,
Yeah?
it is unconditional
Yes.
in the Deuteronomic version.
Yes. You've got your different...
Two sides of the same coin.
You do. In Deuteronomy, this will all occur again, and it is unconditional at that point. Because again, you've got these multiple different sources that are coming together to share all of this. Anything else? Doug, did you have anything? Okay. Are we good? Okay. There's Mosaic. Let's wrap it up with Davidic covenant. We got to jump all the way to 2 Samuel, chapter 7. So they'll wander in the wilderness, and then finally at the end of Deuteronomy, Moses will not be able to go, but he'll write about his death. The people will go in. We'll have Joshua in the time of the judges and Joshua as they're establishing dominion in the promised land, right? And then they'll start to create the nation of Israel. And we'll come into the monarchy, okay? So here we are, 2 Samuel chapter 7. This is one of the big ones. We can usually think as Christians, there are certain scriptures in the New Testament that you can say the chapter and verse or the book and the chapter, and we would be like, oh yeah, that's where the Beatitudes of Matthew 5, different things like that. For our Jewish brothers and sisters, 2 Samuel chapter 7 is a lot like that, because this is the Davidic covenant. This is one of the big ones. And so we're going to be looking at that. This will be our last one today. 2 Samuel chapter 7. Let's look at, let me read the first part and then I'll have somebody else pick up in chapter 8. Now when the king was settled in his house and the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies around him, the king said to the prophet Nathan, See, now I am living in a house of cedar, but the ark of God stays in a tent." Nathan said to the king, "Go do all that you have in mind, for the Lord is with you." But that same night, the word of the Lord came to Nathan. "Go and tell my servant David, 'Thus says the Lord, are you the one to build me a house to live in? I have not lived in a house since the day I brought up the people of Israel from Egypt to this day, but I have been moving about in a tent and a tabernacle. Wherever I have moved about among all the people of Israel, did I ever speak a word with any of the tribal leaders of Israel, whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, why have you not built me a house of cedar?'" Okay, so this is like a little prologue, which I think is really funny, because there becomes a question of why didn't David build the temple, right? If he was such a great king, why didn't he build the temple? His son Solomon will. And so some scholars say this is a little thing that was added to kind of cover for David, that David wanted to build it, but God said, "Don't worry about that." And so they put that in there at the beginning. I just think that's kind of a funny aside. Okay, but verse 8 is where we get the covenant. So would someone read for me 8 through 17? This will be the last thing we have to read today. So if you've really been wanting to, here's your chance.
Now then, tell my servant David, this is what the Lord Almighty says. I took you from the pasture and from following the flock to be ruler over my people Israel. I have been with you wherever you have gone, and I have cut off all your enemies from before you. Now I will make your name great like the names of the greatest men of the earth, and I will provide a place for my people Israel, and will plant them so that they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed. Wicked people will not oppress them anymore, as they did at the beginning, and have done ever since the time I appointed leaders over my people Israel. I will also give you rest from all your enemies. The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, who will come from your own body, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with the rod of men, with floggings inflicted by men. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. Nathan reported to David all the words of this entire revelation.
Okay. So what's a little bit different about the way that this covenant is given? What do we see here? It's given to Nathan, right? I mean, it's for David, but it's not given directly to David. It's given to the prophet Nathan, right? So that's just an interesting way that one works there. Okay. Last time. We got this. What's the promise?
He will plant them, he'll take care of them. And if they do wrong, they will be punished.
They will be punished, yes. So this one's interesting. Okay, so this is the Davidic line will continue, right? The line of David shall continue. There's a monarchy that's being established. One of David's descendants will always sit on the throne, okay? So the Davidic monarchy and lineage. Who is this for? This is a kingdom, right? Or the nation of Israel, kind of a little bit, it's even larger than it was before. So it's for not just this little family, not just these tribes and nations, but this is a kingdom of sorts. At least how it was originally maybe interpreted, right? The sign, what's the sign that this covenant is taking place, or would have been the sign? Would be a throne, right? That you would have someone in the lineage of David sitting on the throne. Okay, and what type of covenant is this? And we'll break it down here before we head out. Conditional, unconditional, what do you read in there? Are there any conditions put on it? It's unconditional. with the aside that I will punish.
And that's part of the covenant.
That's part of the covenant, yeah, that I will punish. So, when all of this is being written, okay, there is no king on the throne of Israel because they have been exiled into Babylon, right? In fact, all of this is written after David sat on the throne and his descendants sat on the throne. And so the Israelite people are looking back and trying to understand the promises of God in light of where they find themselves, either in Babylon or recently coming back from exile, depending on what books you're reading here. And so it's important for them to start writing down the stories of their faith so that if they get a chance to come back, they don't repeat the errors of before, the conditional. They were no longer a treasured possession or a priestly kingdom because they broke all the rules of that covenant. But there is this promise that God is going to establish the lineage of David, but there is no king on the throne of Israel. So what does that mean? And that's part of what the people are wrestling with at that time. God made this promise to us, but we're out of our kingdom now, and there is no king on the throne of Israel. But if God made this promise, surely it must be true, and so what does that mean for us? And if we ever get a chance to go back and have a king on the throne again, how will we do this so we make sure we don't mess up again? And these are the questions that the Israelite people are writing down and trying to understand about God. One quick thing I wanted to read before we leave, because I know it's getting to that time. And this is kind of the tie-in to the next week of what I hope we'll talk about. Richard Rohr talks about chosenness. And I love when Richard Rohr talks about chosenness. And so this was something that was on his email earlier this week that I loved. He's talking about Romans 11, but I think a lot of it can fit into here. Talking about how Paul talks about chosenness, so a good Jewish boy, and how he talks about chosenness when there's no king on the throne of Israel. So Paul in Romans 11 is trying to define chosenness. He's speaking of the Jewish people. He says chosenness is definitive and irrevocable, but he also says chosenness has nothing to do with worthiness, which is so hard for our tit-for-tat minds to understand. God's choice has to do with God alone, not with us being worthy or ready. No one is ever ready. In fact, the readiness comes from experiencing and surrendering to the chosenness. That's a subtle point, but it's absolutely foundational. The biblical tradition goes to great lengths to show that God always chooses the unworthy, the weak, the sinful, the broken, so that no flesh can glorify itself in God's sight. We are merely God's instruments. When we love God and love others, it is God doing that through us and in us. Paul also says that chosenness is for the sake of experiencing mercy. Ancient Israel's chosenness is not so that they can feel superior and saved, which is where immature religion always stops. Rather, Paul says very clearly that we experience chosenness so that we can know what it feels like to be God's beloved and experience God's mercy. Only then can we communicate that chosenness to everybody else. Now we are a fit instrument to describe what it feels like to be beloved, to be elect, to be significant, to be validated, to be gazed at with the gaze of God, and to be mirrored by that ultimate mirror. So this is kind of where I want us to head into next week. What is chosenness and the promises of God? How do we understand it in our context as Christians? And what does that show us about how we are out in the world? This chosenness, this belovedness, and how do we share that with the world around us? So more to come. Keep chewing on this. Maybe we'll revisit it as well. But this is where we start, okay? All right.